Armond White, thanks for sticking with us for just a little while longer.
Sure, my pleasure.
So, Armond, I have a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts, and we can talk about so many things, and I'm just grateful you're on. Let me just let's start by talking about, I guess, this is just a personal question. I'm just curious. After your appearance on our show last time, where we discussed Inception, which I should point out was one of our most controversial episodes of all time, as you may be able to imagine. I wrote an article summarizing some of your viewpoints on film criticism. I was wondering if you had a chance to read it by any chance. Or do you even know to what I refer?
I think I did, but I have to confess, it was a while ago.
Yeah, it was about a year ago.
So refresh me.
Yeah. It was basically about how you said that you thought Roger Ebert destroyed film criticism. Which so I wrote about it because I thought it was an interesting point of view, and so on a personal level, I was just curious if you'd read it, and if you, I assume you found that it was not unfair, because otherwise you probably would not have come back.
Right.
So
yes. So I did say that, and you quoted me accurately. So.
Okay, all right. Just curious about that. Now,
and you know, I think it's. I think that statement has been proven correct over and over again.
You're doubling down. You're doubling down on it. Okay. All right.
Especially for anyone who's watched that god awful TV show.
Oof. Okay.
That's on public television of all offenses, where he hired two film critics to pretend that they were going to be critics, and now look what happened. They wound up simply promoting his old clips, his old TV clips. This is proof of what he's really about. He's not about criticism. He's just about himself, his own ego.
All right.
And that said, really, I don't want to talk more about him, because I think it's really evident. It's really evident how pathetic he is.
Okay. All right. Well, let's put a stop.
Harsh words.
Yeah. Let's put a stop. You're right. Let's move on to the topic. So here's a question as well, Armen, and I'm being, I don't. To me, like film reviewer or film critic is not. It is an identity for me, but it is not one that I attach too much emotional well-being to. That's just for me personally. That being said, it does seem to me that a lot of the online forces that you rail against, the democratization of film criticism and so on and so forth, the idea that anyone can have a voice, it is personified or encapsulated in a site like slashfilm.com or in a podcast like our own. And so I am curious, like, what your sort of, if you sort of hold that disdain for our podcast, or just podcasts in general, we're an exception, or you think we're okay. Like, I am curious, like, what your attitude is towards us, as opposed to, online film writing or
not putting you on the spot here.
Not putting you on the spot.
And this is something that Dave does attribute a lot of emotional well-being to.
But what I'm saying is, you should feel free to totally rip into us if you feel the need to. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, that's not my style, fellas. and believe me, if I felt that way, I wouldn't be talking to you.
All right.
Obviously, I think you have a right to your opinion, and I respect that you discuss films openly, and that you're open to an exchange of ideas. That's crucial. What I am against is the kind of institution of film criticism where you have people who pretend to be authorities, and they are not, and in their pretense of being authorities, they close off discussion. To me, that's what's happened in the realms of professional journalism. You have people who don't know what they're talking about, who are hired as film critics, and they don't allow another word to be said about films. The discussion is closed. All the talk about democratization of criticism, which is a concept that I think is nonsense, frankly, because you cannot democratize expertise.
Fair enough.
I think that's just a bullshit way of trying to gather readers, trying to gather an audience in your corner. When what happens is that people with the authoritative journalistic positions simply enjoy their positions of authority, and they maintain their positions without opening up discussion ever. That's what I'm really against. I'm against authorities. I'm against so-called authorities who don't know crap, and I'm against closed discussion. I'm all for open discussion. I'm all for people talking about movies sincerely, but most of all with some expertise, who can bring some information and genuine feeling and response and intelligence to the discussion.
Well,
not just a high-paid position.
Well, I think I understand why you're okay with us, because obviously we make no pretense to have any expertise whatsoever. So I think that's
but the open discussion is that's what's that's what makes you valuable.
It is the process of acquiring.
That's what's to be respected. That's true democracy without having to pretend that you're democratizing anything.
The process of acquiring expertise. That's what we're all about here. We're in that process. You
can only acquire expertise through learning and through exchange of ideas.
Exactly. There you go.
Really, when you read the New York Times, you're not getting an exchange of ideas. You're getting edicts from on high, and not necessarily from people who know what they're talking about. This is what I would like to wake folks up to. And then you have there's a certain area of the internet where people presume expertise and they don't have it either. They're simply playing a game of cinephilia, and I've got little patience with that when people are talking nonsense there. I didn't hear any nonsense in our discussion tonight, and that's the kind of discussion I can take part in.
All right, so there you heard Armond White says Slash Filmcast superior as a film source to the New York Times, and I think that's what we can
feeling pretty good about myself.
Yeah, feeling pretty good. Anyway, well, Armond, I don't want to get too much into this. I think there's other stuff we can talk about other than the personality or the persona of Armond White, but I do find you to be a fascinating persona just because you've been in the news a bunch of times. There are, blogs devoted to writing about what you write about a movie. One instance in which you've been in the news was at the New York Film Critics Circle Awards dinner in January of 2011. Right. Just a quick question about. I would like to hear your response to this. I'm going to read from this article from EW.com written by Lisa Schwartzbaum.
Don't put me through that, please. I'm familiar. I'm familiar enough with that.
Okay.
Don't put me through that.
All right. I will not read from the article. I'll just say that there was a New York Film Critics Circle Awards dinner, and words were said, many of them by you. And some people didn't take kindly to them. And I just wonder sort of what your post-mortem on that event was.
Well, the article you're referring to, and I guess we might as well bring in a couple of other articles, such as an item on the Gawker website and an article, I believe, in the Village Voice and probably some others as well, were simply lies. The statements and the attitudes that were attributed to me never happened. There are articles about the lie in the Hollywood Reporter, in the New York Post, that made clear, even though they didn't get a lot of internet traffic, there are articles in the Hollywood Reporter and the New York Post that stated clearly that there are people in the critical community in New York who just have vendettas against me and simply will lie. And so what happened that night at the Film Critics Dinner, as reported in the Village Voice and in Gawker and in EW, are false reports. None of that happened. You can read elsewhere, as in the Hollywood Reporter, as in the New York Post, and if you want, you can poll individual members of the New York Film Critics Circle, and they will tell you I was a polite host to everyone. And let me also say that in the New York Press, which is available online, if you go to the article I wrote about that evening, where I quote at length and verbatim Annette Bening's statement at the podium where she talked about the relationship between artists and critics. This is what E.W. and Gawker and the Village Voice never quoted. They didn't quote Annette Bening. I didn't make Annette Bening cry. Annette Bening, in her words, supported everything I did. That's the reality. Another part of the reality is that there are people who've got vendettas against me, and so they are willing, and I don't care about that, frankly, because, that can happen to anybody. The only thing I care about is that they lie in print and have never taken back the lie, and so the lie spreads. I guess it's that unfortunate phrase from The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, when the legend becomes truth, truth will print the legend. Well, the legend is still a lie, and I wish people would stop printing it, so you guys and anyone else would not have to believe it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad, I kind of wanted to ask you, so this is an opportunity for you to clear that up as well.
Sure.
But
I got no problem with it because the truth is its own defense, I like to feel. And I was a gracious host. Darren Aronofsky was an asshole there at the dinner. And isn't it strange that you have some film critics who would rather be spit on by Darren Aronofsky rather than appreciate that their own chairman would defend his profession?
Well, speaking of your profession, just last question about this, and then we can move on to another topic, like maybe AI. But I guess I am curious. You must know at some point, like by now, like that many of your reviews have prompted pretty violent responses. And I mean that literally. I mean, people, for some reason, people on the internet think that if you don't like a movie that they like, they should go and hunt you down and kill you. Like they will write you. I mean, not you, Armond White, but like they will write emails to this effect, and certainly you're one of the more well-known people who has been writing reviews that on movies that people have called you contrarian and things of that nature. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how do you feel about that? Are you proud of the fact that you are able to deliver an opinion that few other people have, or are you sick of this kind of attitude, this fanboyism that must be responding to your reviews negatively? Like, I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are on your place in internet culture.
Well, let me start by saying I'm grateful to have a place where I can express myself, and especially a platform like City Arts, where we want to raise the level of discussion about the arts. That's the beautiful thing about City Arts. That's one of the beautiful things that I enjoyed about working at New York Press as well. It is unfortunate that we live in a culture where people don't understand what criticism is, where people have closed-minded ideas about differences of opinion, and they can't tolerate differences of opinion. And not knowing what criticism is, they don't understand that you read a critic not to agree with a critic. You read a critic to get ideas that will make you think about the work of art at hand. It's tragic that we live in a culture where people don't understand that. It's tragic where a difference of opinion is considered being contrary, whereas conformity is considered the way to be. The idea that everybody has to think alike and like the same thing, well, that's not democratic. That's almost fascist, and it's pathetic. It's in cultural terms and intellectual terms, it's a tragedy. It's a catastrophe. Our culture will only fail and shrink if people are not allowed to have a different opinion, if they're not allowed to try to work out how they respond to works of art for themselves, rather than simply trying to join a herd mentality or trying to hook up with groupthink. That's pitiful. It's bigger than whether or not people are angry at me. It says it indicates that people don't know how to think and are not interested in thinking, and it's a pretty sad state of affairs for our educational system when you've got lots and lots of people on the internet thinking and behaving that way.
Well, I actually agree with most of what you just said. So, well said, sir. I want to ask you about a review, and we can all talk about this. Let me talk. I'm curious about your Toy Story 3 review. Your thoughts on Toy Story 3, because you and director Joseph Kahn. Are you familiar with the works of Joseph Kahn?
Sure, love him.
Neither of you liked that film, which was widely regarded as one of the best films of that year. And one of the things you didn't like about it was that you thought it had a consumerist message, right? Is that correct?
Okay. Well, it did, yeah, but okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I was wondering, your reviews sometimes you make reference to something like that, a theme like that, and then I'm left wanting more a little bit about if you could expand on that a little bit. So I guess could you talk generally about that film and maybe what types of negative messages you think it sends, and maybe Devendra and Adam and I can also chime in with our opinions as well.
Well, I haven't thought much about Toy Story 3 since seeing it.
Fair enough.
To me, it doesn't warrant much thinking, but because to me the problem with it is obvious. It's just a piece of commercial product, and kind of scary that people respond to it with what they think is affection. I think that in reality that people are simply responding to the marketing mechanism. They feel, here is item 3 of the Toy Story franchise. We must love it because we like the first one, perhaps, and because we have pledged allegiance to Pixar, and we love anything that Pixar does, and we won't think about anything that Pixar does. We'll just simply bow down to it. So the whole Toy Story 3 phenomenon, I thought was scary and offensive. But in the film itself, I found none of the situations, or can we say characters, not credible to me, but most of all, not moving or affecting. The very idea of how human beings relate to their toys, or how toys express something in human nature, I thought was a failure in that movie. And in my review, I started out talking about a moment in Whit Stillman's Metropolitan, where the relationship between human beings and toys was very poignantly and believably depicted. And people who hated my review didn't seem to understand that at all. They didn't want to relate to that at all. They were too busy salaming Pixar, and that's the problem. I guess if you want to call that the reaction to my review a phenomenon, the problem was that people weren't paying attention to what I said. They were simply upset that I wasn't saying, yes, bow down to Pixar.
Well, I do think your reaction just now kind of implies that that people didn't find meaning in the film, or that the way they found meaning was specious somehow. And I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I think a lot of people did connect with the movie, and I think that it connect emotionally with the movie. And I think maybe I agree that there is something potentially troubling about how the movie kind of glorifies the relationship that a child can have with possessions. But at the same time, there's also messages of friendship and of and kind of the magic of imagination that the Toy Story series expresses really well, that I think are found in the third film. And I think that's a lot of why people really love this movie.
I will say, though, I totally agree that people did just have this immediate adverse reaction to the fact that it's like someone said something negative to Toy Story 3 and they don't think they actually read what you had to say about it. But I'm curious, based on what you said now, how would you characterize the response to Cars and Cars 2? Because Pixar fanboys weren't into that film at all. Like there was no support for that sequel.
Well, I didn't bother with Cars 2. I mean, the first one to me, the first one was worthless. I wasn't going to subject myself to a second one, frankly. So I have no comment on Cars 2. Toy Story 3 did nothing original. We can go back to that argument again. I felt, of course, that Pixar is all about formula, and the formula that I saw in Toy Story 3, that it seemed to me that other people were willing to accept or ignore in Toy Story 3, was a formula that had been done pretty decently in a movie like Robots, and exceptionally, I think, in a movie like Small Soldiers. As a film critic, I'm all about the cultural heritage, and I try to keep in mind the good works of art that have enlightened me in the past, and I wish to encourage other people to think the same way about culture. I despair when a new movie opens and people behave like children, and that as if they had no past, as if there were no cultural legacy for them to ever refer to and learn from, and they simply accept what's being sold to them today. Toy Story 3, for me, simply isn't good enough, and it isn't good enough because of movies like Robots, because of movies like The Iron Giant, because of movies like Small Soldiers. And this is a crucial part of critical thinking. We have to be able to compare something to something else. We have to be able to learn from our cultural heritage. We can't simply be children saying, "Give me what's new" every weekend. That's not intelligent. That's simply being a mindless consumer.
Well, Armond.
Sorry, I wanted to respond because this was actually a point of contention with the review of Real Steel, where I thought like it was really derivative and it didn't compare favorably to a lot of older films that had explored similar themes. How do you make that distinction between Toy Story 3? Yes, and I agree. Actually, Toy Story 3 definitely has a familiar formula. In fact, it actually is the same formula as Toy Story 2, even. But where do you draw the line there? Like, what makes Real Steel acceptable and Toy Story 3 not?
In terms of the
derivative nature of the material,
can I say the authenticity of the ideas that are presented in Real Steel, the amount of ideas that are presented in Real Steel, but very importantly, don't forget about what we did tonight. We talked it through. We didn't simply call each other names because we disagreed. This is also the essence of criticism and critical thinking and cultural discourse. If we don't talk it through, then we don't. If we don't have discourse, then all we do is have playground squabbling, and that's worthless. That's immature and it's worthless. Talk through the ideas. That's important. We're going to have difference of opinions because we're different people. We're going to have different responses to films because we are different people with different backgrounds, with different emotional needs. That's going to happen. But the point of discourse, the point of criticism, is to talk out the ideas, to try to get a better understanding of why we respond the way we do, or exactly try to get a better understanding of what our responses mean. The end point is not consensus. The end point is not agreement. The end point is to try to enlighten each other about how we respond, how we feel, and what works of art say to us, how works of art affect us.
I think a lot of kind of the violent reaction is for instance, in the list of movies you just named. I mean, I look at a movie like Robots. We're talking about the Ewan McGregor robotic movie, yes? The animated film, yeah. I mean, I look at a movie like Robots and I compare that to a movie like Toy Story 3. And I just find Toy Story 3 better executed on a number of levels. I mean, just the storytelling. You were talking about the authenticity of ideas, and to me, Toy Story 3 feels like it's coming from a place that is more authentic than a film like Robots, which feels like it's going through the motions. Toy Story 3, has a thing where it's the idea. It seemed as though it came from a place where, and I spoke with John Lasseter about this. It came from a place where, his own children were going off to college. The actor who played Andy from the first film was getting to be like college age, and it's kind of about them moving on, like entering the next phase of their lives. Both the people that created the film and also the characters in the movie. And so it seemed to me like it came from a place of earnestness. And what I was going to say, to finish my earlier point, I think, if I may speculate, and I'm sure you already know this, a lot of the negative reaction to some of your reviews is the fact that you compare two movies, like say Robots and Toy Story 3, one of which is universally beloved, and the other one is not universally beloved, but you kind of invert the relationship to the two in your assessment of them. I'm not saying that I'm not at all impugning your motives, but just trying to sort of get behind some of the reaction to them. Do you know?
Sure. Well, if anyone knows anything about the history of culture, about the history of art, the fact is, the works of art that are not appreciated in their times are the works of art that are eventually discovered to be the most meaningful, the most creative, the most imaginative. Anyone with any sort of arts or humanity education knows this to be a fact that historically happens over and over and over again. Every critic in the world should know it and should understand that it's almost your duty to remind people of the films of the past that have been neglected, because that's just the way the history of art and culture works. The big hits are soon lost. Maybe it takes a couple of generations, but the big hits are lost to memory. They're swept into obscurity because they don't stand the test of time. So, to me, that's just plain good sense.
Well,
that's a plain sensible way to operate as a critic. What you say about Toy Story 3? I thought the look of it was more Pixar formula. It looked slick. It looked like it didn't have any authentic feeling or imagination in it. I don't care about the actors who took part in their own personal stories. That's irrelevant to watching the film for me. Whereas one of the fascinating things about robots was that it actively dealt with the look of antiquity in terms of mechanics and toys, and by doing so, it evoked feelings of obsolescence, of use, and it evoked affection for old objects. This is part of its meaning. You don't get that in Toy Story. You're told that these toys are something that the boy character cares. Andy, is that his name? That Andy
yes.
cares about.
Yes.
But you never. I didn't see any place in that movie where you felt it. Instead, I felt that there's this kind of anthropomorphized personality given to toys, which misrepresented the way children invest toys with their own imaginations, and also was far less inventive, far less amusing than the way the toys and small soldiers had their own personalities, and probably, in fact, dangerous personalities. I just thought Toy Story is just more formula that people were simply willing to buy. And so I offered alternative examples and a very brief review, which if I remember correctly, was less than 600 words.
And yet,
I could have gone deeper into it, but I didn't. But I gave basic reasons for my objection to the film, and if people want to disagree, fine, disagree. Have a discourse about it. But to resort to the ad hominem attacks and name calling that's not discourse. That's worthless.
It's interesting how your what do you call it? One of your works that you might not have put as much work into is probably one of your most widely read pieces of writing ever.
I put a lot of work into it.
Oh, well, I mean, you were downplaying the amount of analysis.
I was being brief intentionally.
All right, fair enough. Well, Devendra, did you have any question? Did you have a question for Armond about like print versus online, or are we?
I guess it's this would be a good thing to explore now. Like, given that we're seeing print. I think print journalism in general is sort of going by the wayside, and everything is becoming more focused on online. Are you seeing that as well on your end? Because I know like you had to shift around where your reviews were going, and now it's mostly focused like online, right?
Well, no, I'm very much involved in the print edition of City Arts.
Okay,
but I know that there is an online audience that I want to reach as well. So I'm trying to do both.
And do you think that's still, I guess, possible now? Because I guess for print editions,
it's got to be possible. It's got to be possible, and because we still have newsstands, we still have news kiosks, we still have subscriptions that people pay for and look forward to receiving. So,
I guess what Devendra is saying is, first of all, yes, it is not our intention to downplay the printed edition of City Arts at all, or any printed version of your work. I think that certainly, I would argue, tens of thousands, or if not hundreds of thousands of people have connected with your work through online and not through print. that's just a fact.
But also, like I would say, like, you know, you look at the existence of newsstands and everything. That doesn't tell you that they're actually going to stick around, because you walk around New York now and you see all the closed borders and the Barnes and Nobles that not too many people are going to too much either. So
yeah, Devendra is just kind of, and I'm a little curious too, like what you feel about the future viability of film criticism as a profession, and do you think it's still vibrant and has a bright future, or do you, because from our perspective it looks as though it looks a little bleak in the sense of film critics being a sort of a viable option for someone's future.
I guess it is kind of bleak, but the profession is only going to die if those who practice the profession let it die. And the way they will kill it is if they simply succumb to the attitude that their job is not to be critics, but their job is to be shills, to be boosters for Hollywood. That's not the job. Why should people read reviews that simply say, yes, go see it? Why should people read reviews that don't look into what a film might be trying to do, successfully or not? Why should people read reviews that don't take a film with a small advertising budget seriously? Why should people read that? The people who write criticism ought to keep in mind that their job is not to be boosters for Hollywood. Their job is to try to bring thinking to the work of art and to help to enlighten the audience for a work of art, not just simply rubber stamp the ad campaigns. Rubber stamping the ad campaign has simply led to everybody thinking everyone thinking that they can write criticism, and at the same time, nobody valuing criticism, what passes for criticism. We have to have some standards in this profession.
All right. Well, I think we that's
and by the way, that's a separate thing to what has evolved, I think, on the internet, where there's confusion as to what is a critic and as to what is people having discussions and simply talking about films. That's all confused now, and it really doesn't help. The confusion will remain if people whose legitimate profession of criticism don't help clear up the confusion, and they use phrases like that New York Times phrase, democratization. You cannot democratize expertise, and it's not trying to put anybody down because they don't have expertise, but I'm trying to make a distinction between professionalism and what used to be called gentlemen amateurs. Gentlemen amateurs is a historic phrase, and it's respectable. But a gentleman amateur is not a critic. There's a difference, and these differences need to be clearly stated, clearly drawn, clearly understood. And that's not to put down what anybody's enjoyment of film or even of talking about film. But let's clarify what's what. I have a profession. It's a profession I studied. It's a profession I work at, and I'm not about to for 1 minute say that anybody can do it, because what I do is different from what those who don't have the study and the expertise do.
All right.
There's a difference.
Fair enough.
That doesn't make me a better person than them. It just says I'm a professional. The others are not.
Yeah, but I guess it also applies to both, like, print, other print film critics and online film critics too. Because I read plenty of local newspaper critics who are terrible, and their opinions are worth nothing. So I guess it's a problem that's facing both print and online. Yeah. That's what I'm really interested in looking at right now.
But Armond, I think we're happy to be considered gentlemen amateurs if you think that's
I never wanted the critic title personally, because like whenever people actually often sort of say like, oh, you're not living up to, you have to live up to a certain standard. I actually do think there should be a separate term for like what we do, and gentleman amateur, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, gentlemen amateurs. Is that okay with you, Armond, if we're called gentlemen amateurs?
Hey, I'm serious about it. And in my personal life, I make the distinction. I talk about critics, meaning my colleagues, and I talk about real people. real people have a much more open attitude about films than professionals do, and I respect that open attitude. I think it's a beautiful thing. I get a lot out of it. I learn a lot from that.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. We got to wrap up pretty soon, but let me ask you this: favorite film of the year so far, least favorite film of the year so far, or it doesn't have to be just one. But if you have any thoughts on either of those,
well, it's hard to say. But probably among the best films I've seen so far this year is the Canadian film Armend.
Oh, yeah.
You guys know that one?
I had an opportunity to watch it and unfortunately missed it, but I am actually looking forward to seeing it. So
that's still a powerful, beautiful piece of filmmaking to me. I still am enthusiastic about Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I think that's just fucking wonderful.
We're all really surprised by that as well.
Yeah, we all enjoyed Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Any movies you didn't like that you care to share?
There's a bunch of them. I mean, the Gus Van Sant movie, Restless, that just stank to high heaven, and I don't know. I don't know. I see a lot of things. I don't know. There are a lot of bad ones out there.
All right, we'll just assume that's most movies out there, and take.
Well, hey, that's the way it is. I mean, most movies are bad. But there are enough good ones to keep us interested.
Yeah. Have you seen 50-50 yet?
I saw that. I was disappointed in that because I like the Whackness by the same director, Joshua Levine, a lot.
Yeah,
I like the Whackness a lot. I was disappointed in 50-50.
Oh, hey, I got to ask you because you did not like Moneyball, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You actually, then you did actually a joint review of 50-50 and Moneyball, right? Where you destroyed both of them.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, let me make that point again about great movies being forgotten at the moment and possibly being resurrected in the future. Moneyball is nothing compared to Oliver Stone's Any Given Sunday, which is an idea I didn't get to say in my review. But to me, that's the great movie about the political economics of professional sports. And critics have forgotten it in their rush to simply bow before Aaron Sorkin. Any Given Sunday, Any Given Sunday is better than any movie that's opened so far this year. To me, that's Oliver Stone's masterpiece. Great film.
All right.
I even though I did like Moneyball, I will say I think Any Given Sunday is one of the more interesting sports films out there.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'll say this, Armond White. If in 50 years people are talking about robots with Ian McGregor and not Toy Story 3, I'm going to remember this conversation. And I'll say, Armond White told me that 50 years ago.
We'll have a drink on that in 50 years.
Exactly. That is a